So this presentation is how to formulate a pitch. We're going to start with a land acknowledgement, which is we acknowledge that we are hosted in the lands of the Mississaugas and the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This is traditional in the TDSB, and though we aren't at school now, we're going to begin with this. Next is how to ask questions. So if everyone can check the people you're able to chat in the chat box, you can see that one person is labeled send questions here. So you can send a message directly to them at any point, and they're going to keep track of messages and questions. And when we have a Q&A period later, you'll be able to, we'll come back to your questions and answer them. So today we are joined by Mark, who's a venture capitalist, and he's going to give us a presentation on how to create a pitch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stella. So yeah, I think learning how to pitch is a really, really great thing to learn. And it's awesome that you're doing that and going through the pitch contest. Just a little bit about me. I basically grew up in Toronto, just on the next slide. Got a bit of a background just so you know who's talking. I've lived in Canada and abroad a little bit, 4 years in France, and spent some time in Singapore as well. So that's been super fun. I started work at my work career at the CBC, and then I started a magazine with some friends that I had graduated university with. So that was a real good lesson in starting a business and working together. In university, I did English and journalism, which is sort of how I got my very first start at the CBC. A few years ago, I shifted to tech, did digital for the CBC, and then I joined a startup about 15 years ago, and was really doing marketing and sales for that company. And now I advise a bunch of different startups at Mars, which is a sort of an innovation hub in Toronto that has about 1,300 startups that are part of it. And I run a small venture capital fund. So essentially, I've got a group of investors, and on their behalf, I look for early stage tech companies to invest in. So we start very, very early with them. And yeah, I live in the High Park area. We got 3 kids in high schools. And so we have been living this kind of lockdown, much the same as you have, in terms of, you know, sometimes at school and sometimes not, and so on and so forth. So what are the key elements to creating a great pitch? I think that, first of all, this is a kind of thing that you learn, you know, it's a lifelong process, and the way you pitch is going to be personal to you, and you can become great at it. I think these are some of the elements that are really important. An obvious thing maybe, but a lot of people seem to forget it, is definitely understand who is in your audience. Who is in your audience, and what are you asking them? What exactly are you pitching? It's important to understand that sort of goal. And we'll talk a bit more about these items, but the next big thing is what's the headline? What's the main message that you want people to come away with, so that if they were thinking about your pitch the next day or the next week, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's that pitch that you know, what is the main headline that they should remember? Because you kind of have to craft that headline so that they do remember it. Yeah, the next thing is, I think it's super important to tell a great story. If you can do that and make it memorable, it makes your pitch really, really compelling. At the same time, you want to be yourself. You want to be authentic, and you don't want to be, you know, stretching too much to be something that you're really not, because I think people fundamentally will judge your pitch a lot on you. And so you want to be kind of true to yourself and what you're all about. And then the last thing is, and again, a lot of people forget this, whether it's in sales or in pitching, but actually ask for what you want. And that might sound really silly, but a lot of people are just so excited about doing the pitch and about talking about their project or their effort or their robot, that they sort of forget to kind of really come back and say, I would like blah. So let's take a quick look at these different aspects. So the first one was the audience and the ask. And so what I mean is, in the pitch, who is this particular audience? And is it a group of people from companies? Is it a group of parents of your fellow students? Is it the fellow students? Is it a mix? You kind of have to understand who people are in the audience. And it's definitely wise, I think, to change your pitch or adjust your pitch depending on who's in the room. So if you're pitching for investment dollars, it might be very different from pitching for to win a certain kind of a contest where you're having to highlight accomplishments and various things like that. And the fundamental thing is empathy. Like, we all have this ability to kind of put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And that, I think, is a really critical part of pitching. You kind of have to say, okay, I know what I want because I've gone through step number one. I know what I want out of the pitch. But what do my audience, what do the people I'm pitching want? What are their interests? What do they care about? What are some problems they might have that I might be able to solve? And I think that is just really fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental for so many things in life to be able to kind of imagine walking in someone else's shoes. So that empathy piece, I think, is really important. The next bit is to know your objectives. So it's good to be a bit strategic. Okay, I think if we, could convince these people this, then that might get us, a bit more funding or get us to the next step in a pitch competition or whatever it is, or it might get us a critical meeting. And then once you've sort of got a sense of who's in your audience and what they care about and what your objective is, you can brainstorm a bit to find some common ground. Like, what's the win-win here? How do we both come out of this, with a smile on our face and a deal or an agreement or whatever it may be? And then lastly, on the audience piece, it's not, not every pitch is worth everyone's time. And sometimes this is a hard lesson. In rare cases, I think it's okay to defer a pitch if you're not ready, or even to decline to pitch if the audience isn't the right audience. You have to be careful doing that, obviously, because you may not have that option if it's for marks in school, or it may be that the expectations have been set that you will pitch or what have you. Most of the time, in my experience, the experience of doing the pitch, you always learn something. And so the experience is worth it. So, but bear in mind, I think, perhaps later in life, as you're pitching maybe for really important things in the future of a business or a job or whatever, sometimes you just have to go for it no matter what. Sometimes you can choose your moment. So just something to bear in mind. So the next piece is really about this main message. And I think, again, it's a really critical part of presenting in general, and it's a good part of pitching. But essentially, you want to think about more or less, in a sense, what is it that I'm trying to communicate? If there's one sentence that people should remember, what would it be? And that should really contain, how are you in your pitch or project different from the others? What's the benefit for the audience? In other words, if they support you, what will they get? Will they be advancing, a pitch that's going to be great for society or great for their community or great for them personally or great for their company? The big three words to kind of test a main message are, is it clear? Is it memorable? And is it compelling? So pretty self-explanatory, but they go fairly deep. So clear presentation is often one that's well structured. It's got a logical flow, tells a good story, doesn't have spelling mistakes. You can do a great pitch just with pictures. You can do a great pitch without any slides at all, just by you, in front of an audience, passionately talking about what it is you're talking about. But whatever your sort of physical means or props are, the flow and the story and the logic need to be clear. Memorable, I think, is pretty great. And, lots of ways of making stuff memorable. It could be a great anecdote or a cool set of visuals or, laughter or all kinds of things. And it can just be your energy and your enthusiasm that you bring to the whole pitch. And then compelling is, does it compel people to do something, to take the next action, to do what you want them to do, whether it's to support you or to invest in you or vote for you or whatever that may be. And then there's, you've all probably heard of the elevator test or the elevator pitch. And so, what I would say is, can you put it in a sentence? And if your pitch time was reduced from, 10 minutes, I think you have in this next one, sometimes you have half an hour to pitch, sometimes you have an hour. But if the organization came to you and said, sorry, we're out of time, all we can give you is 30 seconds, would you still be able to kind of pull it together and basically use that 30 seconds to cover the most important kind of main message of the pitch? And, hopefully it doesn't come to that ever, but certainly in some business situations I've been in, it does. So it's good to know what your main message is. Like, what is the headline that I would give? And then, look, we'll take this up another time, but, hopefully that was enough to interest you in talking further. Stories are super important. I think our brains are wired for stories. I think our language and our dreams and our lives a lot, we really resonate with stories. And so there's a certain mode that the audience's brains get into when you say the effect of, once upon a time, or, I want to tell you a story, or, once I was doing this, or have you, like, if the audience understands that they're going to be told a story, then their brain is expecting a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's a very powerful kind of narrative structure that you can use in your pitch. A lot of pitches have or a lot of stories revolve around archetypes. So essentially, classic types of stories that you can put different characters in, and it kind of follows the same pattern. So lots of movies, Pixar's animated movies are often about the hero's journey. You've got a kind of a interesting character. The character goes through a bunch of challenges. Screenwriters will often refer to the hero going through, a dark night of the soul where everything's gone wrong and everyone's abandoned them, and it's raining and it's dark and they've got nothing going. And somehow they have to dig deep, maybe work with some friends, maybe something unexpected happens, and they're able to, complete their hero's journey by doing something great. Another classic archetype, which is super useful for new companies and people just starting out, is the old story of David versus Goliath. Essentially, think about it as, a newcomer, maybe, potentially, smaller of stature or less powerful, or, just new to the whole environment, is able to somehow, through brains and shrewdness and nimbleness, defeat a much bigger person. And so a lot of the startups that I talk to, we use this sort of David versus Goliath type of mentality to say, well, there's all these more established companies that are sort of the big, lumbering giants. And part of what's appealing about a startup is that it's got this brand new story that's going to challenge those bigger competitors by being smarter, faster, more innovative, more credible, more diverse, whatever their sort of secret is. But those types of stories, it's really, really powerful if you can kind of envelop yourself into a story, because in a sense, you're not just doing a pitch, you're sort of, you're making a movie, you're myth making, you're wrapping yourself in a legend. And it sounds kind of funny, but it actually does work when it's done well. I think getting people's attention is a trick. It's often useful at the beginning of a pitch to start off with something a little bit memorable. Some people call it a hook. It could be a problem, it could be a story, it could be a crisis. Like, did you know that there's a huge crisis in the world, and this is how we intend to solve it. That type of hook can get people's interest at the beginning. It's okay just to talk about, the story so far. It's a bit of the once upon a time thing. Like, we wanted to bring you up to speed. We're a team. This is what we've done. We've had these successes and challenges, but now we're ready for the next big thing. And it helps set the stage for a story, and for the rest of your pitch. If you can sort of establish something that's not right, that needs fixing, or there's an opportunity that needs to be taken advantage of, a problem that needs to be solved, then you can sort of position that question, and then your pitch is the answer. So here's how we do this. Here's how we take advantage of this opportunity. Here's how we solve this problem. Here's how we finish the rest of the story. And so that is a classic pitch structure. And then at the end, the resolution of the dilemma is essentially, your ask, your sense of, where do we go from here? Well, here's what we're going to do. Here's, if you can vote for us in this pitch, then we'll go on to do this, and then we'll go on to do these great things. I think in terms of your visual presentation, there's lots of ways to do this. I tend to use just a relatively, I guess it's text heavy, super simple kind of Stark mode. It works for me. There's very good presentations which just have, one picture per slide and maybe a few words. If you've got the structure, then you can use the slides just to kind of signpost the structure and remind yourself, and you can say what you're saying just in a very natural sense. It's often very painful if you're reading the slides, especially if you kind of have to turn around in a live setting. We're all on Zoom these days, so it's maybe not as much of an issue, but really I think you want to, use the slides as a cue and a jumping off point and as a structure, but you really want to be basically talking, yourself from your heart, because the material. And I think, try to get the spelling right and things like that. Those are just things that tend to distract your audience. And part of what you're doing in a pitch is you're trying to keep everyone on the same kind of subway train, like, come on the train with me, let me take you a few stops, and then you can go. And when you, the ways that you kind of lose people's attention, it can be as simple as, spelling mistakes, or, people start to lose interest because it's not a good match between their interests, not a good fit between you and the audience, etc. But keeping everyone's attention and keeping everyone on that train is a great skill. And these are some of the ways that you can do it. On the authentic piece, it's great to be polished and professional. I think that you're allowed to be human, and especially as your students, people are looking for your enthusiasm, for your, the things that you've done, just for your own kind of heart and your passion for the project. And they're willing to overlook a lot of other things if you're enthusiastic and passionate about stuff. When you don't have much of a track record, and it could be an individual or a company, you and your team are really the main reason for someone to get behind you. And so you want to rely on the things that you're proud of. So it could be just you're a really good teammate. It could be that you're passionate about things, or that you've got a real love for a certain subject area, or whatever it is. So you have to try to bring a bit of yourself into the fore, and it can be hard to do because in some ways you have to be a bit vulnerable. But people really respond to it when they see that there's a real person on the other end. And I think that goes hand in hand with things like trying to make a genuine connection. If you can generate some eye contact, if you can generate some back and forth, that can go a good long way. Humor, if you're comfortable, can work and build rapport with the audience. It doesn't work for everyone. If you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to do it. But again, I think it can be a way of just sort of breaking the ice. And fundamentally, if it's something that if it's part of you, then don't be afraid to let it shine a little bit. The final piece here is don't forget to ask what you're asking for, which again sounds super obvious, but like I said, a lot of people get so caught up that they're sort of like, they run out of time, which is the worst thing. It's like, and then, the moderator says, that's it, you're out of time. And then the audience is like, what? I don't even know like what their conclusion was. So do keep an eye on the time, give yourself time to kind of conclude and make the ask. A simple way of bringing things to the close and kind of reminding the audience why they're there. It can be more subtle, but here are some examples. I mean, today we're asking for your vote, or if you're a company raising money or a group raising money, doesn't have to be this amount. It could be $1, doesn't matter, but we're raising some money and we're looking for your participation. We're hoping you can, support us financially. Or perhaps, hey, I've given this pitch. Would you be willing to spend a little time giving me some feedback? Maybe that's my ask. Or would you be willing to make an introduction to somebody? Or overall, you can just say, I think, the next steps would be this, this, and this. Like, let's have this other meeting and then let's, vet this and da-da-da. So it's just great to end your presentation with kind of what you want and what you want to do next. Those really are the elements. I think just to summarize, the why is your ask. Why are you doing this? Well, you want something out of it. You want to try to think about what that is and to sort of distill it down into the next step. Who really think about who your audience is. You've probably all been through a painful thing where the person is pitching the wrong thing to this particular audience. I mean, you're all students. You've probably had people present to you who just don't get what your interests are, or they're trying to pitch you on something that you're just not interested in. The what is really your main message. Like, what is the fundamentals of the pitch, your story. And how you do it is you tell that story clearly and memorably, hopefully, by being authentic. And don't forget at the end to make the ask. Ask for what you actually want, and you never know, you might actually get it. That is it for my slides. I am happy to take your questions through the question, the ask a question entry in the chat.
Yeah, Mark. So thank you so much. I will be moderating, so I'm going to deliver any questions we get from the audience to you. Again, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I know I did. So here, the first question. What do you say if a judge asks you a question about a data point that you're not sure about or you don't know the answer?
My rule is always tell the truth and don't try to sing and dance. And if you don't know the answer to something, the best thing to say is, I don't have that info right now, but I'll get back to you.
Awesome. When I watch Dragon's Den, sometimes the people pitching distinctly call out one of the judges. Is that a good thing to do, to interact on a personal level?
Yeah, I think it's part of this idea of knowing your audience. And if you're going on Dragon's Den, then part of the reason people do that is because the different dragons have different areas of interest. So, Arlene Dickinson is interested in food and wellness, and Mike Weckerly is interested in a whole other different set of things. And, I think when a Dragon's Den contestant is pitching something that they know their company or their product is going to be of interest to a particular dragon, it can be a good idea to make it personal that way. And again, it fits under this broad category of know who you're pitching to. Sometimes you don't know them individually, you just know some things about their interests or their position or what their, I mean, for judges, like, can you understand as best you can what their criteria are? I mean, that's a good thing to think about. It's a bit like if you have an assignment and you have the rubric, you can usually sort of figure out what the assignment needs to contain. And it's the same thing with judges. Most judges will have criteria that they're sort of judging or marking you against. And often you can determine. I mean, sometimes it's made very obvious, and it's like, here are all the criteria. In other circumstances, it's perhaps not as obvious, but you need to do some thinking. So if you're pitching venture capitalist, one of the big things is, venture capitalist always happy to hear your idea, but fundamentally the investor or the venture capitalist or the dragon has to answer the question to themselves is, if I invested in this idea or these people, would I make money? So that's kind of the criteria there. So I think it can be a good strategy, and it's all part of knowing your audience.
Awesome. Yeah, just waiting for the next question. How much time do we need to spend on each of our beginning, middle, and end for our pitch?
Well, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. I think about the beginning just as the first thing or slide that you say, the way that you sort of set the scene. It could be as little as a few seconds or a couple of minutes. The end, I think, is again, just the last slide or two, the last couple of minutes. And so I think if once you've sort of got how you want to begin and how you want to end, then the time frame of whatever format is sort of tells you how much room you have to cover the body or the middle of your story. And that's again where the kind of your main message is often supported with a couple of pillars. So we believe that you should do this for three reasons. 1, 2, 3. The rule of 3 is a very good one when you're doing supporting points or when you're doing bullets on your slides. More than 3, sometimes 4, and people are pretty it becomes a long list, and it's like a grocery list, and people can't remember.
Makes a lot of sense. Are there specific cliche phrases we should avoid when pitching?
Yeah, I think that it's part of being authentic. I think if you are just imitating stuff that you've seen on Dragon's Den or in movies or whatever, again, it can come across as inauthentic. So I think being clear and authentic in your communication, I mean, cliche can be useful, but it's if you say, I would steer clear from jargon, stereotypes. Again, try to make it fresh and make it your own. I think people will appreciate that. In tech, and I'm sure in robotics, there's so many buzzwords. It's AI, it's virtual reality, it's blockchain. There's just so many things like that, and people have heard those buzzwords so many times, and it's better to really be clear and human about your language. We found these problems, here's how we work to solve them as a team, and we've really got some great insights into this, and we think with your support we can really go ahead and do something amazing. I think if you can avoid cliches, I think that's a good thing to do, but the headline is be authentic, be yourself.
Makes a lot of sense. In terms of presentations, is it different on Zoom versus here? I know you mentioned not having to look back in every way, but is there something else that can make a difference?
Yeah, I think we're all learning how to present on Zoom. I mean, I've never done so many Zoom presentations as I'm sure you have, and Google Classrooms and all the rest of it. So,
definitely.
I think the technical stuff is important. I think the sound is super important, and it's worth probably prepping just to make sure that people can hear you clearly from wherever you're doing your pitch from. So, I've got dogs in the house. I tried not to have them nearby so that when they see a squirrel, they're barking and interrupting. I think that clear sound is a really important part of Zoom, because we only get the little square of the person. Yeah, and so I think our brains are getting a lot from the sound and the voice. And if the sound is distorted or there's a lot of background noise, it can just be very hard to pay attention. And so that's one of the things I've noticed about Zoom is really pay attention to your audio.
Makes a lot of sense. So you said that if we aren't ready, we should defer a meeting. How do we do that without it reflecting poorly on us?
Well, it's an art. And again, I think you only do it rarely. And I think sounds like in the current situation, you can't really. And so you gotta, suck it up, buttercup, and go ahead and do your best, right? I
Mhm.
think if you're, I have had sales situations where I've literally had a demo that just wasn't ready, and it was going to be worse to do the demo than not. And I've called up the person and I've said, just told the truth. I've said, look, the team is working really hard. We really want to do a great demo for you, but it's not going to be great if we do it tomorrow. Can we reschedule to next week? And again, many people will be okay with that. Another example is in fundraising, and this may be only of interest if you're sort of going on and building companies and stuff, but there are situations where you shouldn't pitch. So people may ask for meetings for you because they want to give you money because you've got a great idea and super hot space and so on. Sometimes it's good just to say, we're not taking fundraising meetings right now. That shows a lot of discipline and a lot of kind of focus and control. I think sometimes it's good to have the space to be heads down and working with your team on your robot, on your product, on your project, whatever it may be, and not to get distracted by doing a lot of meetings and doing a lot of interviews or whatever. So in high school, you don't really often get that latitude. So it's not as relevant, but I mention it because in certain very rare circumstances, if you just know that it's just not the right time and it's going to be a disaster and it's worse than the alternative, then it's just something to think about. Probably doesn't apply to many of you right now.
It's helpful, I think, even in terms of first in general. As teams, we definitely reach out to individuals talking about not just relative to the seminar series, but also in general for funds. I know a lot of teams do that. We do as well. So it's definitely helpful. Would you say it's better to create a long pitch first and then form your elevator pitch, or the other way around? Start with an elevator pitch and really focus in on the things you want to talk about in more detail.
I've seen it and done it both ways. I think if you can, what I often do is, with a team, brainstorm, try writing stuff down. It's often good if you can sort of do an outline, like, here's our secret sauce. Here's our big idea. Here's the main message we want to lead. And then you can kind of build the supporting points. I've also seen people just tell the story and do the pitch as a practice and then sort of look at it or review it and then almost iteratively get back and say, okay, well, that part worked, that part was terrible, that part was a dud, there's something here that we could maybe work with. And so you iteratively kind of build that main message by trying it. And I don't think it really matters how you get there as long as you try to get there. And especially with slides, Google Slides and PowerPoint, it's sort of the software kind of makes the format for you. And what I would try to urge you to say is, forget the technology. If you were just talking, to the person, what would you be saying? And then add the PowerPoint or the Google Slides as kind of the supporting elements after. But that's I think how you can, you don't want to be overwhelmed by the technology. You want to say through it what you want to say, as opposed to being sort of defined by, it. And it's like, you don't want the person to remember, well, they had like 52 slides and I don't remember any one of them. You want to be like, oh yeah, that was the team that, is really all about
Blank.
speed or quality or whatever it is.
Makes a lot of sense. That actually builds a little bit into our second question. Should it be a completely memorized presentation, or should bullet points in the slides be sort of a guide?
Personally, I like bullet points as a guide. You can generally tell, and I don't claim to be the world's best presenter, but I definitely try not to read the slides. And hopefully you could tell I wasn't just reading all the way through. The slides are there, people can read them. I think you want to kind of jump off them and use them as a way to keep yourself on track and make sure you cover what you want to cover. So I use the bullet points, and I basically try to make sure that you know the subject well enough that you can speak to it. And that way, you can even do the kind of, I don't know if you've seen some of the old Steve Jobs presentations at Apple, but he was, it was like 3 words per slide was his limit. We'd have a beautiful picture and then like 2 or 3 words. And certainly lots can be learned from pitching from some of those old Apple demos. You can all see the introduction of the iPhone or the iPad or the MacBook Air and on YouTube, and there's a lot to be learned there. I think it's good to have things memorized, not that you're memorizing all the words that you're going to say, but that you more or less know, okay, I'm going to talk about how we form this team. I'm going to talk about this challenge we overcome, and then I'm going to talk about what we want to do next. And so you think about it as chapters, and your slides or your bullets are sort of helping remind you, okay, now I'm in this part of the presentation. Now I'm in this part of the presentation. So that, I think, is the most effective way, so that you're talking really, and it's perhaps, again, you need to be a bit vulnerable, but I've found that if you over prepare by memorizing, you come off as more wooden. Whereas if you kind of force yourself to be ad-libbing a little bit, you are really trying to communicate, and people get that human connection a little bit better when you're doing it with preparation and with some support, but fundamentally ad-libbing and not knowing exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, I kind of thought that builds on your be authentic point. If you have a fully memorized script, it can come across a bit robotic, I would think.
Yeah, which might be okay in some
in robotics sense.
Just kidding. In robotics, I think in robotics, the contrast of being, really passionate and really human is probably an asset.
Mm-hmm. What if you don't know an answer to a question or freeze? Should you follow up with the judges later?
Yeah, I think it could be helpful. I think it can be okay to be vulnerable and to say, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. I can't think of the answer right now, but we'll get back to you. Or maybe one of my teammates can step in. And again, those are just very human moments. And I think they often add to the, they add to the kind of authenticity or the humanness or the realness of your presentation. So, don't be afraid. Like, everyone's been in your shoes, everyone's frozen under the spotlight or been super nervous. And I think you can build a lot of empathy from the audience by showing that you're a little bit nervous. And again, you're on your own hero's journey in this presentation. So you want to try to overcome and say, oh yeah, now I know what I wanted to say. I wanted to say this, so try not to worry about it. You can recover. And yeah, if you feel like you've just totally blanked or forgot the answer to something, it's okay to try to follow up. Sometimes the format of a certain contest or judging thing won't permit that. It's like, nope, you only get your time and that's it. I don't want to talk to you. You have to kind of respect the rules of whatever pitch competition you're in. But yeah, do whatever you think is fair to advocate for yourself.
Awesome. I think we just have a couple more questions, maybe 2 or 3. The next is, should you ask everyone you pitch for 100% of what you want, or divide it by the number of pitches you'll be doing?
That's a great question. I think if you're pitching for money, I think it's good to pitch for the whole amount. So let's say you're trying to raise $10,000, and it's going to take you a few months. But let's say after the first couple meetings, you get someone who's like, you know what, it's a lot of money, but I think I could probably support you for $1,000. And you're like, wow, $1,000, that's awesome. So then in your next pitch, you say, we're raising $10,000. And even though we've only had a few meetings, we've already had a commitment for $1,000. And the next person's like, wow, someone already did that. That's great. Well, I'm going to give you $2,000. And so then you've got three. And so then you say, we've got our goal is $10,000. We're already a third of the way there, and we'd love to close. We'd love your support to help us close this out. Maybe that person gives you the 7,000. So that's the way I like to do it.
Right, sharing landmarks, that makes sense. How do you recover if something goes wrong on a virtual standpoint, like the PowerPoint doesn't work or the presentation freezes?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a point where you have to. There's a point where the technical issues are so bad that essentially you have to stop the presentation, and hopefully the organizers step in at that point and say, "Look, we're having some technical issues. We're going to regroup, and in 5 minutes we're going to have you restart." If it's a temporary glitch, let's say it's on your end, so the whole thing, everyone's there, the audience is there, but all of a sudden your teammate who's playing the slides, their internet goes out, something happens, a person chops the fiber line or whatever. That's when ideally you have some backup, so another teammate has the slides that they can then share. But fundamentally, if you know your main message and if you know the story, and this can be very powerful because it shows how passionate you are and how you can kind of overcome any difficulty, you want to be able to continue your presentation verbally and kind of go through your chapters and just imagine, okay, now I'm talking about this challenge we overcame, and now I'm talking about our goals and aspirations, and now I'm talking about the things we need. So I think, if at all possible, you want to keep going and kind of deliver on your slot. But there's a point, just yesterday, we had a very, impressive speaker at Mars talking about positioning, which is like what the category is that you put your product in and how you differentiate yourselves from your competitors. And literally it sounded like she was in a helicopter. The audio was so terrible and the chat was just lighting up. And eventually the organizers said, look, apologies, we're going to stop for 5 minutes and then restart. And, that was the right thing to do in that case.
Yeah, I actually had a similar situation. I was in a training session for a staff position this summer, and they had a limit on 100 people for the Zoom, and nobody was being let in. So they actually did the same thing. They sent out a new email and new links. That makes a lot of sense. So I think this is our final question. So how important are visual aids in PowerPoints? And if so, what should be included? Just the main points?
Yeah, I think it comes down to personal preference, and it comes down to, is the overall presentation, not necessarily even using slides, just your presentation, is it clear, memorable, and compelling? Some people can be compelling just talking for 10 minutes, and they're super compelling. I think that the convention is, for many pitches these days, is to have at least a few slides. And different types of pitches have different conventions around the templates and so on. Fundamentally, if you sort of look at my guidelines, you'll be able to kind of adapt those guidelines to whatever the specific circumstances are, the specific audience, the specific time constraint, etc. I like slides with visuals, or slides that have a really clear kind of main message, and then maybe no more than 3, maybe 4 supporting points, and then the person's talking to kind of fill in the blanks. So I think that, especially when if you've got some cool visuals, pictures of your robot doing something neat, or of a certain way that you solved a problem, I think showing, not telling, is very powerful if you have that. Same thing with data and graphics. Like if you've got, if you can show that you've solved some technical problem by showing, how you've reduced the time to do something, or reduced, mean time between failure, or reduced, processing time, or whatever it is. Like graphics are really cool. it's probably a whole other session to talk about, how to really do great visuals. But I would say keep them original, keep them authentic, keep them compelling. Practice, and if you practice on your siblings or your teammates, you'll know. Watch their response. If their eyes glaze over, then you got some more work to do.
Well, thank you so much for answering our questions and creating a fantastic presentation for us. I'm going to go into a little bit about the pitch competition, so feel free, you can turn your visual off, or if you need to go, I'm sure you're busy, that's totally okay. So for the next part of the seminar, I'm just going to be going over what's needed and what's the important information for the pitch competition. Again, thank you, Mark. Okay, so
You're welcome. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
we're going to start looking at, the WARP7 values are about sustainability and skill development, and we want to see how that's shown in what you create, which is why we're offering the grant of $1,000 to teams who have shown the ability to learn and can show proof of application of the skills learned in each of the seminars. So you will be pitching to a team of 5 of our judges, many including past panelists. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail over what exactly you'll need to be pitching, as all of this is going to be really important. I'll also go over any important dates. So what are you presenting? As you guys can recall, our first presentation was about how to write a proper grant. So we're going to have you guys write a 500-word grant about what you've learned, why it's important, and how you're going to apply these skills. And you'll be sending that to us a week before, not a week before, sorry, pardon me, a day before, which I'll go over how you can send that to us later. Then your actual presentation will be 15 minutes with a 10-minute presentation and a 15-minute question period. It will cover you have to be knowledgeable on the topics we've covered, as well as proof of implementation of these topics, future plans, and reasons why you'll be successful. So we've created a rubric, and we're going to share a little bit of what that looks like to you. So you'll be marked on the grant itself, as well as the presentation. So visuals, and then presenter's ability just looks at the flow, making sure there's not a lot of errors, things like that, just in terms of general presentation skills. And then in terms of content, you'll have to include a financial plan and a finance breakdown. And both of these should include references to each of the things we've learned in the seminars in the past. For example, plan to engage sponsors is something we talked about. And then you will also be marked on a question period, which will be the 5 minutes at the end of your presentation. So important dates. April 8th is the presentation day, which is 2 weeks from today. You will have individual time slots, and the winner will be announced on the same night on Instagram Live at 8 p.m. Toronto time, which is Eastern Standard Time. So in terms of booking your time slots, you're going to email teammates65.warp7@gmail.com by Monday, March 29th. So that's this upcoming Monday. And you'll have to include who from your team will be presenting. We're going to reply with a time slot for all of you, which will again be on April 8th, anytime between, if I'm correct, anytime between 4 and 6, I believe. And then we will talk to you then. We'll be sending you emails, giving you updates, anything like that that you need to know. So if you guys have any questions, please send them to Send Questions here. I'm going to be staying on for a little bit and answering all of your questions. Will there be a sign-up sheet for those who are interested, or is each person obligated to participate? That's a good question. It's not a sign-up sheet, so I talked about emailing the team. So you'll be, if you want to participate and have a chance to win the $1,000 grand prize, you'll need to email teammates65.warp7@gmail.com. And then we will, and the thing included in that email, again, sorry, is just the names of who will be presenting. You can have anywhere from 1 to 3 presenters from your team. Yeah, and sorry, individual people are not obligated to present. Your team as a whole presents, and you can have 1 to 3. So if it's just you representing your team, that's totally okay. If there are a bunch of you from your team, you can work together, create a pitch all together. That's the point. That's what we're excited about sharing. Any final questions, you can send questions here. Please let me know if anything's unclear. And if anything is unclear, please also email the account listed. Are you able to go back a couple slides so I can finish making notes? Of course. Here, I can do that right now. Is this the slide you were talking about, the rubric? Yes. And I can go a bit slower on the other slides too. Will you be sending information about will you be sending out information about the audience will be presenting, what their charitable goals are? The one before that, sorry, someone said, is this what you were talking about? Let me know if this is the right one. I can go, I'll keep both. It will be posted, all the information will be posted and emailed to you. So if you're not able to take all notes now, that's fine. And we'll post the complete slide deck like we have with all presentations in the past. And as this is being recorded, it will also be uploaded to our YouTube and our web team website, which is warp7.ca. You got the notes, that's fantastic. No problem, okay. And then if you want, I can hold it over the rubric if that's important. So this is actually a quick summary. So the content, for example, will be broken up a little bit more. We have clear things. So we've got 1 point basically, essentially for every seminar, making sure you talk about each of these. What do you mean when you say 500-word grant? Is that the written grant application, like a letter to the company? Yes, so you're going to be writing to us. It'll be 500 words, and you will email it to us on the day. And it's going to be going over what I talked about. So it's essentially like we talked about what an elevator pitch looks like. Sorry, I'm going back. So it's basically your presentation, but in a grant style format where you're writing out why you're looking for the funds and you're pitching basically to us as Team 865 WARP7 because we are the funders in this case. I hope that's clear. I'll wait a couple minutes in case any final questions roll in. But thank you guys so much for coming to our presentation. We're really excited to hear from you in the next 2 weeks. Again, please email. I'll end on this final slide so you can mark down the email we've been sending you. But please email us if you have any other questions, and we'll be talking back and forth over the coming weeks until April 8th. So thank you guys again. If you have no other questions, feel free to log off.